Hey guys, I'm Danny and this is the Stock Car Surplus YouTube channel. Today's episode was supposed to be about getting that fuel cell in this car, but unfortunately the part supplier in Mooresville that I dealt with has left me empty-handed. Essentially, I went in and picked out the exact part number that I wanted, handed them a stack of $100 bills, and in return they ordered something that they thought I needed, and I'm empty-handed. So I contacted FuelSafe directly. I have one on the way, should be here by Wednesday or Thursday of this week. So what we're gonna do is what my fellow Marines would do. We're gonna improvise, adapt, and overcome. I've gotta get the dry sump tank and lines in this car anyway, so what a better time than now to jump into a deep dive on dry sump oiling systems. When I say a deep dive, I'm talking about everything. Everything from the pan, the different kinds of pumps, how they're mounted on the engine, oil filter housings, plumbing, hard lines, how the tank is mounted, what's in the tank, heater probes, blankets, you name it, we're jumping into it. Every single thing you wanted to know in detail about a dry sump oil system. We're going to do that today. So stick around, guys. I think you're going to want to see this. This is the Gen 6 Toyota Camry cutaway car. There's no better car out there than this to give you a better idea of how a dry sump oil system is laid out. We're going to start in the rear of the car with the oil tank, and we're going to move forward. Then we're going to look at the oil pump and the plumbing underneath the hood of this car. Where the oil cooler is, the oil filter, how the plumbing goes from the pump through those and into the engine, how it's scavenged and sent back to the tank to be filtered and cooled. Let's start at the rear, take a look, and we'll move forward. Okay guys, let's take a look at the Camry cutaway car. I'll show you where most of the components in our dry sump system are located. We're gonna move around to the back of the car, and I'm gonna show you where the dry sump tank is. It's on the left side of the car behind the driver's seat. When the 2007 Car of Tomorrow chassis became the standard for Nascar, this is where the tank was located. It doesn't matter if it's a road course car, super speedway car, intermediate or short track. The rules now mandate this is the only position for the dry sump tank. This tank is a 5-gallon tank, the left side behind the driver. This is the breather line for it. This is a number 20 Wiggins. This breather line comes through the package tray and down to a vapor breather in the tank. This one's carbon fiber. The tank, if you look down in the box, this is the return side of it, and it has a particulate filter in it. This one's an XRP cartridge filter. So any metal particles getting pumped back towards the tank get caught in this filter before they enter the tank housing. On the older cars, like a 2005, 2004 Gen 4 car, you could put the oil tank on the right side of the car, the passenger side, where the gear cooler is at. You could mount the tank over there. I've seen in the 80s cars that had the dry sump tank mounted in the passenger side just in front of the truck arm crossmember. With the inception of this car, that's no longer usable. You can also see behind the seat where the battery is mounted on the Gen 5, Gen 6 cars and the Xfinity Nationwide 110-inch car. The older cars also were allowed to mount the battery over on the right side just outside the frame rail. It gave for more right side weight bias and it squared the car up more. Now to get oil from this tank to the front of the car, they use stainless lines. There's usually 2 or 3 stainless lines that run from the rear of the car all the way to the front, and they go up the firewall to our engine. They're connected with hoses like this. There should be 2 or 3, depending on how many stages are put in the tank. 2 or 3 lines like this, typically wrapped in a fire sleeve braid like this for temperature, going into the back of the car. Once it gets up here to the firewall, depending on if the oil pump is on the left side or the right side, usually right there underneath the brake pedals, those lines would cross over the back of the engine, come forward to our dry sump pump. This is where the pump is located on a Toyota. I'm going to show you more in depth the stages of the pump and how it works on a motor that's out of the car. For now, I'm just going to show you the associated plumbing that goes to the system. It comes off of our pump. This is our engine oil supply line. Now this is a CNR bypass filter housing, which allows you to bypass the filter and the cooler for qualifying conditions. It has a lever on it right here. You can push the lever up and you can push the lever down to bypass the filter, housing, and element altogether. When it's closed and it allows oil to circulate through the filter, the oil comes in from the pump, goes through the housing, filters in the filter cartridge, comes out of the filter housing and into the bottom of our oil cooler. It will circulate through the cooler, back up, across again because it's a double pass cooler, and come out of this line, travel back down into our filter housing, then out into the engine oil galley at the front of the block. On a Toyota, it's on the left side just in front of the cylinder head. That's where everything is located in a Toyota. Some vehicles may differ. They may have the oil pump on the left side and the power steering pump up here on the right side. There's a big difference between some of them. Okay guys, on the bench here, I've got a dry sump pan on the left and a wet sump pan on the right. Let's take a look at the differences between the two. Up first, we'll start with our dry sump pan. This is a 4-stage dry sump pan. That means there's 4 individual compartments to scavenge oil in the crankcase. The crankshaft is spinning in here, oil gets thrown to the bottom, it rides down, it's collected here. Everything that drops in here is actually sucked out and it rolls underneath the bottom edge of this lip in the pan. Anything that rides up rides over this lip on the inside. There's another lip down here. So anything that gets thrown around goes up against that lip and it goes underneath that shield. Nothing is held in here. The oil supply for this engine is not held in the oil pan. It is held in the tank in the back of the car. Everything that rolls under there runs into a valley. As you can see in this pan, where it's welded, these are 4 individual compartments and 4 individual pickups. They're called a stage. So this is a 4-stage pan, and it's connected to our oil pump with this tubing. This has Wiggins clamps on both ends or double Wiggins. This will go into the oil pan, this will bolt into place and make a leak-proof seal. The good thing about these Brown & Miller fittings is that you can rotate the fitting because of that O-ring seal in the joint. So that is a swivel fitting. On this end, this plugs into our dry sump pump. On our mock-up engine, I'll show you in a moment, where all 4 of these lines hook into the bottom of our pan. That is a dry sump pan. This is your standard wet sump 604 Chevrolet oil pan. I say standard when it's not really standard. This one is actually a Moroso RC772. Now I bought this when I was racing late models, and this is for a 604, goes in a late model. This is an upgrade from the standard stamped steel pan. This is all TIG welded. This came from Moroso. It's actually made out of stainless steel, has windage screens in it, several baffles and trap doors, and it used a Melling high volume M55 HV high volume pump. In this system, the crankshaft spins in the oil pan. All of the oil is held here. Everything that supplies this engine, all of the oil is held in the bottom. That's why it's called a wet sump. The sump is full of wet oil. This is all of your oil capacity. This is where it's held. Any extra oil capacity could be held in a remote filter and lines, but this is what supplies your engine. This engine has kickouts on both sides. This was a great oil pan. I never had a problem with this pan. This engine was actually converted to a dry sump. That's why this pan was taken off of here, and that engine's being used in another project. Now, there's nothing wrong with a wet sump. There are plenty of engines that make 400, 500, 600 horsepower with a wet sump and a drag race application, and that's not a problem. But continuous left and right turns on a road course, a wet sump pan is not the best alternative. This can starve your engine for oil under acceleration and loading in the corner. It can cause you to spin a bearing. You can lose oil pressure. A lot of people do use oil accumulators. I hate them. I don't care for them. I don't really care for a wet sump system. But some classes, that's the rule. And when I race late models, and this was on my 604, this is what I used. Let's take a look at an oil pump and pan like this in a dry sump application on our mock-up engine. Okay guys, this is our dry sump oil pump on a dry sump system. This is a 6-stage. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 stages right here. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. These 5 stages scavenge oil and pull it out of the engine and return it to our dry sump oil tank in the rear of the car. This is a 4-stage dry sump pan. 1, 2, 3, 4 stages in the pan. That pulls everything out of the pan, sends it back to the sump. Here we have a line going into the block. This is a block scavenge line. On the Toyota, at the rear of the engine, that comes into this block plate and scavenges oil from the crankcase in the lifter valley and around the back of the camshaft. It provides positive crankcase ventilation, and this line also scavenges to the pump and sends it to the rear. On the very front of our pump, this is our fresh oil supply stage. In front of that, that is an adjustment with a bypass spring in it to adjust our supply feed oil pressure to the engine. Oil comes into the bottom of this pump, goes through a set of gear rotor gears inside the housing, and it comes out and into our oil filter housing. On the front of our engine, you can see the drive belt for our dry sump system. It mounts off this mandrel on the front of our crankshaft. It is engine driven. This Gilmer belt feeds the drive pulley on the pump. This belt is removable and the pump spins freely. You do this, you'll remove this belt so that you can prime your oil system here. Once that oil is up to temperature from being heated in the tank, we'll circulate it again. And we'll continue to run warm oil through the engine until the engine temperature and oil temperature are high enough for safe engine starting. I'm going to get a drill and we'll hook up to this and I'll spin it over and I'll show you how it's primed outside of the car. Okay guys, this is a DeWalt DW160V. I have found this, over all my years of doing this, to be the most reliable and best drill to prime a dry sump system. The 90-degree head makes it easy to get in and prime just about any engine. I have used this on Fords, Chevrolets, Dodge, and Toyotas. This is a great drill. We've got a 1/4-inch Allen head on here now. That's what this daily pump has in it to prime it. I'll show you how we engage the pump and we turn it to the right. The engine rotation is to the right. If you're sitting in the car, it is rotating to the left. So just remember, when you're in front of the car and you're priming the pump, you always turn it to the right. So we'll engage the pump with this 1/4-inch drive and we'll give you an example of how to prime it. Engage the front of the pump. And that's it. Priming this pump allows you to pull warm oil preheated from the tank, pump it through the system and into the block. It heats up all of the bearings and it provides warm lubrication for all of those tight clearances prior to your initial startup. With a dry sump system, depending on your engine tolerances that you'll have to check with your engine builder, I highly recommend you always prime the system and never cold start it. These are the hard lines that are going to run under the floor pan on the driver's side of our Supra. These are the soft lines that we're going to use to connect these 2 stainless lines to my dry sump tank. This tank's been taken completely apart, it's been cleaned, and it's going to go back together. These are the baffles that go inside of our dry sump tank. What these do is they take all of the foam and aeration out of the oil. They actually collect the oil and run it through the baffles so that the oil isn't foamy or frothy. And when it goes to the bottom of the tank, which is here, the pickup actually picks up completely liquefied oil, not a foam, not a vapor, anything else. That picks up nothing but the oil. This is the top that I'm using on my oil tank. This is from Peterson. It actually uses a flat plate style return screen element. It goes into the top of the tank. This bolts on, My return line clamps on here with a Wiggins fitting. This is the system that I'm gonna go with. I've got two different heating bands to heat the outside of my tank. I've got a thick band and a small band. This band is 500 watts. This band is 250. Now I haven't installed these on my tank yet because I haven't got it in the car and I don't have the band clamp mounts on it yet. So I don't know how much room, high or low, I will have. Will I be able to use a thick one because my clamp goes on? Or will I have to use a thin one? I don't know yet. But we're definitely going to put a band on it. And we're also going to use a heating probe. This probe goes into the bottom of the tank. 120 volt power goes here. And this heats your oil. This is a cleaned one. This is one that's been in an oil tank for quite some time, but I found it in a parts drawer in my building, so I pulled it out for an example to show you what it can do, how hot it can get, and how it can scorch your oil if left unattended. This is a heating element and a temperature probe combined into one. These alone are just simple temperature probes to tell you what your oil temperature is when you're heating it. We're going to use all of these components and put them together and get them in the Supra. Up next, we need to take both halves of the dry sump oil tank that we have for the Supra, and we're going to bolt them together. Now what I'm going to do is I'm going to loosely clamp them and I hang the mounts on them. The reason being is I need to put them in the oil box inside the car, and I need to be able to orientate the return and the supply feed port on my tank with that oil box that's in the car. My lines that run under the car need to have a straight shot to this tank. I don't need a bunch of extra hoses, twists and turns in it, or additional cost as far as plumbing. We're gonna get this put together and we're gonna hang it in the car and see where we're at. Once I get it marked and pull it out, we're gonna go through assembling it, putting all the baffles in it, heater probes, and the wiring that goes into putting the tank together. Let's get to it, guys. So I have my band clamp on the tank and it's loose so that I can twist the tank and orientate it in which direction that I want to go. I'm going to leave this loose so I can figure out if I want the outlet in the front or off to the side or about 45 degrees towards the battery box. I need to figure out where I want my outlet for my pump supply going to the front of the car, and then for my return. I think for the return, I'm going to go with it. I'm going to go with it this way. Now let's try this way. Let's do this. The oil tank is larger, or the oil box rather, is larger towards the passenger side of the car. So we'll screw two of these in here hand tight. I actually got this specific tank from a clean out at BK. And if you can see on the tank, it says TRB039. That's Team Red Bull. Guessing this is tank 39, WG. I believe that might be Watkins Glen. I'm not sure why there would be any other name on there. So I'm assuming they use this as one of their road course tanks. That's why I set it aside and I kept it. So what I'm gonna do now is I'm gonna throw the clamps on it. This is the top clamp. This is from Peterson. And this one's been notched because inside the oil box, there's two studs. I can stick this in and hang it over and leave the bolts loose and the tank won't fall out. So I'm gonna stick this one on. And we'll orientate it kind of like that. Put a few turns on it, but I don't want it too tight. I don't want it so tight that I can't move it up or down and turn it. So a few more. Right there should be good. And then we'll throw the bottom on. Now the bottom is a through bolt. And a lower mount's easy to get to, so I'm not too worried about that. What I will do is I will turn it to where the Peterson name is facing up. We'll bolt this together. Now my reason for not having my heater clamps, or my heater bands to say, on this thing yet are pretty simple. I don't know exactly where my clamps to mount this thing in the car, I don't know where these are going to end up at. I don't know if they're going to end up here. I don't know if they'll end up moved up on the tank. So I'm not sure if I'll have to put a thin band on the bottom. I'm not sure if I can use a thicker band on the bottom once I get it moved all the way to the top or bottom. And then I've got my temp probes that go in the tank as well. I've got to figure out where all this goes. So we're going to mock it up, figure out our orientation. We're going to mark it with some masking tape, and then we'll bring it back to the bench. We'll put the baffles in it, our heating element, pick a temperature probe to go in it so we can monitor the temperature, and then we'll do the wiring on it. I also have to figure out which band I'm going to use. So let's go hang this in the car. Okay guys, I am going to slide under here and position this tank in the car. So I've got to turn it, and this is one of the reasons why I didn't put springs in it yet, because I have to finagle this big dog up into that hole right there, and then turn the mount so that it will fit the way that I want. Like I was saying, all of this is part of mock-up. You got to orientate it, you got to twist it. Every bit of it is work. These cars don't go together as easy as you would hope they do. So let's stick this up there now. Let's see where we're at. The right hook and the left hook. Let me turn the bottom mount. There's the bottom mount. The tank up a little bit higher. I know it's hard to see from that angle, but the tank is actually moving up. The reason I'm moving it up is so that it doesn't interfere with the truck arm or hit any of the moving suspension components. All right, now I've got it mounted the way I want. It took some finagling to get the tank to turn, but I have my filter element square with the side of the tank. I also changed the hose. I took off the hose that was there. The one I was going to use had this 45 Wiggins on it, but I changed it out for a hose. Another one I had that has the 90 turning straight down. Okay guys, we've got our dry sump tank in. The mount is in the right spot. It's mocked up. What I'm going to do now is I've got a floor jack underneath the rear truck arm, and I'm going to cycle the suspension. It's one of the reasons I left the spring out. I want to be able to move this truck arm up to full compression of what the shock in the spring would be, and see if I have clearance between the truck arm and my oil tank. I may have to turn it a little more to get my feed supply line coming out of the bottom of the tank that goes to the hard line. I might have to turn it a little bit more forward if there's not enough clearance. What I'm going to do now is use the jack and raise it up past full compression and see how much room I've got. So far it looks good. And that is full compression. That is the truck arm touching the floor in the front. So now that our truck arm's touching the floor, I can look in here and see I've got more than enough room to put my hand in there. It's never going to compress the suspension that far. It'll never compress the rear spring that far. And we'll bottom out the shock before the spring ever gets this far. And like I said, we're touching the floor pan in the front, and the rear suspension won't go up any further. So we've got plenty of room. I've also got plenty of room to run my feed supply line from here to my hard line going underneath the car. Okay guys, now that we've done the mock-up of our oil tank in the car, I know exactly where my return port's going to be and my oil feed supply port are going to be. I've tightened the band clamps on both parts of this to hold it in place. What I have to do now is mark the tank, so when I put it back together, I have the orientation correct. We're going to open it up. I need to install the return filter. I've got to put both of my baffles in the tank. I also have to install the small heat band, my main heating probe, my filter screen that goes in the filter, and last but not least, a temperature reading probe. And this will tell my heater box exactly what the oil temperature is inside the tank as I'm preheating it to pre-lube the engine. What we're going to do now is we're going to get all this stuff put together, and then we're going to hang the tank back in the car. It requires a little bit of plumbing and a little bit of electrical work, but I'm going to take you along for every step, so let's get to it. Okay guys, first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to loosen up this actual mounting clamp, and I don't know if you can tell by the video, but you can see that it's on kind of at an angle. I've got about an inch here, and I've got about half an inch there. So I want to keep my base of the clamp, the mounting portion, where it's at. I'm just going to loosen it up and straighten this up. Although you can't see it, it's going to bother the hell out of me knowing that it's like that. So we're going to straighten this up real quick. But up next, we're going to crack this tank open. We're going to get this particular band clamp off of it. What I'm going to do right now is I'm going to mark it. Put a mark across here. So now we're gonna pop it open and we're gonna put the baffles in it. All right, first thing we're gonna do, we're gonna look inside here. You can tell this has been a race used tank. I've cleaned this with Scotch-Brite and some aluminum acid cleaner, and none of that is coming out. That's where the old heater band was in the other car, and that's where it was heated at. So what I'm gonna do now is I'm gonna put my baffles together. And as you can see, this has a couple of holes in it. This lines up with our supply feed, our suction port at the bottom. Goes in like that, and there's a small ridge right there that it sits in at the top of our tank. Now this hole here actually lines up with this port. The reason being is if you put a heater element into it and it's not lined up, and you look inside, this probe actually passes through that hole to heat it. Now if that wasn't there and it was just solid on the side, you could never get your heating probe element in there. So it goes in a certain way. Every tank is different. If you disassemble your tank, make sure you remember which way it went back together. Take pictures or video of it so that you don't have any confusion going back together. Now this is the top portion that sits in the top half of the tank. Now what these do is when the oil comes in, it's gonna come in and it's gonna be foamy, and it's gonna be just whatever suction that the pump is pulling out of the engine and pushing back. It may not be completely liquefied. It may have foam, aeration in it. It may have all the cavitation from the pump churning to get it back to the tank. Now on the top portion of our tank comes one line into the filter housing, through the filter, down through both of these sections, and they're turned on the inside. Now what this does is when all of that foamy froth comes out of there, it shoots it at the side of the tank and it swirls around the inside of the tank, and it knocks the air out of it as it slides down the tank wall and through this perforated top of the tank. This fits in the tank like this, and what this does is help re-liquefy the oil and pull all of the air and foam out of it. Now, the tricky part. As we get all of this back together, we have this one large groove machined into the tank housing here. This is the most important groove in the whole housing because it's the seat for this giant O-ring. So this O-ring is going to go in, get pushed into the groove. It's going to seat here all the way around, and then we'll assemble our tank. So this goes in nice and smooth. Everything is sitting there. Next up, we install the lower baffle into our tank. We make sure it's seated within the groove. Then we're going to take the top half of our tank, the top portion of our baffle. It's going to go in. And then the fun part. We have our front line here. I know that this is going towards the front. So now we have to install the top half of the tank, get them to sit together without pushing out the O-ring, hold this thing up one-handed, put our T-clamp back around it. Working on your own, this can be a real pain in the ass. We'll stick our T-bolt into it. Just like that. Both halves of the top are still lined up. Where's my line at? Right there. Just a slight turn. Perfect. We'll keep that within our gap, and we'll tighten this up. We'll go nice and easy. Don't use an impact on this. I've seen people put an impact on it and pull this, and the tank slides out of the way, and before you know it, your middle tank gasket is leaking all over the place. Another thing, this is a mechanical locking nut. Unlike these on the mounting clamps that are nylock, this is a mechanical locking nut, so once you lock this in place, you don't have to worry about it moving at all. And that's good right there. Everything looks good, nothing's out of place. Looks like it's sealed good. Our mark is still straight. Everything is good. I'm happy with it. Now we can work on installing our bottom main heat probe. Then here we have a temperature probe. So we're going to start on the bottom with the heat probe first, and I'm going to use this one. It's already been cleaned. First thing we're going to do is we're going to pull the plug out of it. We're going to get some thread sealer, and we're going to install this in the bottom of the tank. Now, I'm not worried about over tightening this too much. There is a seat in this fitting, so it can only go so tight. So we'll put a few rounds into it. And that's it, it's bottomed out. Up next, we're gonna put our temperature probe in here for our temperature. When I plug it in, this will tell my box, my heater control box, exactly what the liquefied temperature of the oil is, and then we'll get our band put on the top. This is the probe I'm gonna use. I need to change the end on it, but we'll do that once we get into the wiring. We're gonna put a little bit of thread sealant on here, and I'm gonna get a boxed in wrench, and we're gonna take care of that. Grab my paper towel. And I'm just keeping it on the threads. I don't really care for it to get inside and onto the probe. I'll just wipe this down right here. That goes in the garbage. I'll install this right here. That's as tight as that's going to go. Awesome. Wipe down this excessive amount right here. Doesn't look so messy. We'll get all this off. Next up, we're going to install our K-Series thermal connector plug back on the lead to our temperature probe. And that's it. That's converting it from the larger style, just for size comparison. That's the difference in them. This is the mini and this is the regular style for a K-type thermal connector. And now we're going to make a wiring harness for it. Now, all of these K style, and that's the letter K, come in different plug configurations, different plug sizes and types. I'm using the mini style. This is a standard flange mount style. And what you would do is you would cut a square in sheet metal or plastic, whatever you're using. This would slide through in one direction, and a retaining clip slide over the back, and that tension clip will keep it square and mounted in there. There's also this style where it's a flange mount where you screw it in. This just goes through your receptacle of the clamp, and when it goes together, you can put this on a panel, you can put this through a grommet. It'll work either way. There are several styles. This is the larger style. I prefer the minis. Some of the larger style are a dual style. This one has the hookups for the large end right there, plugs in. But if you take a look at it right there, you can also see there's a mini setup on it. So you can plug both a mini and a standard receptacle in it. If you guys are trying to find these and you're having a hard time, message me and I will hook you up with a place to get them from. Okay guys, next up is our heater band. We're going to install this heat band. This particular one is a 250 watt band, and it's going to go around this portion of my tank. It's just a positive and a negative hookup. All it does is use current to create heat through the band, kind of resistance like a burner on your kitchen stove. That's how this works. Now, I need my outlets to be on the left side because in my actual dry sump box on the car, that's where all my electrical is going to come out. And this is actually going to get run around to the right side as well. So we're going to turn this around, I'm sorry, to the left side. So we're going to turn this around. We're going to put a heater band on here. Just stretches over. And I want it to be right about in there. This is our band clamp to hold it on. It has a cutout in it to get around the isolator right there to keep it from shorting out against the clamp in the housing. So what we're going to do is we're going to open this up, and then we're going to stretch it out and we're going to get it on there. So what we'll do first is we'll stick this on, turn this around. I'll kind of get it where I want it, and then we'll tighten it up. So now I have this where I want my electrical connection side to be. What I'm going to do now is spin it around. I'm going to tighten up the band clamp that's on it. We'll tighten this thing down, and this is going to pull the entire heating band and the actual clamping band closer to the tank. Now we have our temperature probe in, our heating element in, our baffles in, and our band clamp on. Up next, we've got to make a harness to tie all of these together. On the bottom, I'm going to install our main plug for our 500 watt heating element probe. We'll plug this in, tighten the nut on the bottom. What I'm going to do now is install some safety wire on the locking nut for my heating element. I'm going to run it around the back, and I'm going to hook it to the AN cap. That's actually the drain on my oil tank. It's actually drilled on this side as well. Okay guys, up next we got to do some wiring. We need to connect our main temperature probe, which is 500 watts, to our 250 watt temperature band. We're going to connect the two here, and we're going to run our main power leads from here to our heater box. This is going to be 120 volts AC. This wiring is quite a bit different than what you would have in your standard automotive grade. So what we're going to go with is a multi-stranded THHN wire. This is equivalent to a 10 gauge. This will carry up to 600 volts. You got to remember, AC voltage is way more than automotive voltage. Right from the start, we're going with 120 volts. Standard automotive race car wiring is 12 volts. So we're going to go from here to here. We're going to put some ends on it. We're going to heat shrink it, and we're going to make our connection here. Then our main harness is going to come from here to the outside of the car. So what we're going to do is we're going to cut this to length. And this is a heat and seal connector, so we're going to put these on here because we're using AC voltage. It's going to slip in. I'll crimp it. We'll crimp it right there. That crimp is set. Once I get both of my wires connected to the probe, they're both going to be red. Both my band and my temperature probe, they are not polarity sensitive. They are using resistance to heat the band and heat the probe. So it doesn't matter which way the current flows. It doesn't matter if this is positive or a negative polarity. It doesn't matter if it's a black wire or a white wire. It doesn't know and it doesn't care. So with resistance wiring, we can use the same color and run the wire to our band here. So I'm going to crimp this on at the bottom. I'm going to do both of these, and then I'm going to break out the heat gun. We'll heat both of these to seal them, and then I'm going to go over both of them again with heat shrink tubing. I'm not using the ground wire on this. This is the same plug that's in here, simply because it's just a contact to the actual probe. So I'm going to avoid running a third wire through this harness. I don't like this harness. I wish there were better options for this harness for this particular probe, but there are not. So I'm going to heat shrink all this here, and then I'm going to run a ground, which is going to be a green wire, to the mount of the tank here in the back. Now a lot of you are saying, well, it looks like it's insulated, but it's not. You can see the stainless straps are touching here, and if you roll this over, you can see that the Peterson mounts on the back are bare aluminum, and they're grounding the tank as well. So when I ground the system, I'm going to ground it to one of these lugs that hold the tank in, and that's going to ground the chassis and the car to keep anything from happening. At the very most, it'll set off the GFI, ground force circuit interrupter, that we use at the track to power this box, so I'm not too worried about it. What we're going to do now is we're going to heat shrink this. I'm going to put some heat shrink sleeve over this, and then we're going to put our ends on it. Now it's a firm crimp, and these seals have sealed both ends of my wire, and they're going to prevent any kind of electrical arc, and they're also going to prevent each of them from touching each other as well. Now what I'm going to do is I'm going to run some heat shrink tubing over all of this, and I'm going to seal the bottom. This is a thick wall heat shrink sleeve, and I'm going to use this on the bottom section because it's going to be closer to the tank, and it'll also allow me to actually go over the end of my fire braid right here and seal that up as well. So we're going to heat that. Now that's sealed up. I'm not going to have to worry about any kind of arc or anything with the base of the tank. We're going to put one more piece over both ends of this. It's going to be a thinner tube. I use the thicker down here where both of my connectors are. I like to use the Tyco Raychem brand. It's kind of one of the standards in the racing automotive industry. So we're going to cut a piece, and I think I can get it to overlap with the other one. There we go. I got the two of them to overlap. Trim it back to here. These are also heat shrink sleeved, so I can put them on, figure out where I want it to go. We're going to leave this just like this for now, and I'm not going to worry about anything else. What I am going to do is I'm going to put a piece of fire braid sleeve around the bottom with some safety wire. Bend it around, and that's not going anywhere. Now, like the red wire that I've used for my tank, I'm going to use some THHN. This is gasoline and or oil resistant. It's another reason I've used this wire. I bought a couple rolls of this and I use it just for this purpose. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to crimp an end on here and heat shrink it, but I'm also going to make the pigtail and bolt it to the car, and I'm going to make this lead about 4 feet long, and I'm just going to roll it up and cable tie it here. So when I'm ready to build the rest of the harness, I can just pull this out because I have to tighten the mount for the oil tank now. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to cut the end off of this, strip it back, crimp my end on, and we're going to go from there. Slide that over. And that'll be our ground. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to roll off about 3 feet of this. Next thing we're going to do is we're going to put the filter element back in our tank. Our element goes in. Grab the rest of the ARP hardware, and we'll bolt this thing in. Okay guys, let's get this and our ground wire hung in the car for good. Okay guys, our dry sump tank is in. It's mounted, it's not going anywhere. All of our hardware is in. On the back, I've used mechanical locking nuts to hold the tank in place. The original mounts on the top, they use a nylon locking nut. This ain't going anywhere. This thing is mounted. We don't have to worry about it moving. Here you can see where my temperature probe, and I've tied back my AC power cables to heat it. I'm not going to have any issues with my heating element and the wiring coming anywhere even remotely close to the suspension when it cycles. Up here you can see where the wiring runs to our heating band, and you can see our temperature probe connector here. There is a hole right here that passes through the oil tank box. I've already got my ground run through there. I have a grommet and a fitting that's going to go there, and I can run in my AC power to hook up right here and actually heat the tank. Up next, now that the tank is in, we're going to start on the hard lines. These are going to run the length of the chassis underneath the driver's side. So let's get those held up in place so that we can hook up our soft lines to our hard lines. This is not sheet metal. None of this is sheet metal. This is steel plate underneath the driver. This was a rules update from a couple of years ago. This plate is actually, I believe, 3/16 thick. So I can drill this because there are no mounts in it. Depending on the thickness of it, I'm either going to put a riveted in nut plate or I'm going to use a nut cert. So let's get to it. Okay guys, next up we're installing our dry sump hard lines. First thing I'm going to do is I'm going to use this stud. I'm going to hang both of these lines from the chassis in the center. We're going to bolt this on here, and I'm going to put the other bolt through the clamp and into the chassis. This is going to give me a centering point to hang these off of so I can mark where both my front and rear clamp need to go. So we'll get this in. I'll get this other one started. Pull that down. I think that looks pretty good. Let me get my spacers and we'll go from there. First thing I'm going to do is I'm going to use some tape and I'm going to mark where the mounting holes need to be drilled. So I'll put a piece of tape up here. Put a piece of tape in the front. Put 2 spacers in the rear. Now these particular spacers are taking up for the distance and the difference in the drop in the truck arm crossmember. So we'll put these in, get this marked. Then we'll move up to the front and do the same thing. We'll move up here. Stick our spacers in here. And here. Now what I'm going to do is I'm going to drop all this back down and take my spacers out. I'm going to drill this floor pan, some rib nuts basically. We're going to put some of those in, and then we're going to mount everything permanently, and then hook up our lines to feed the rear dry sump tank. That is not going anywhere. Perfect. Now the reason I left the middle hole open in this bracket is this is going to allow undercar air to flow around both tubes, and the return oil, which is going to be the hottest, is kept away from the cool oil in the tank returning back to the front of the engine. So this gives me space in between them. I think it looks cleaner. This is perfect. All I've got to do now is put some fire braid on my return line, sort out my feed line. I've got a couple, number 16 to Wiggins, I'm going to try real quick, and then we're done with this video for today. Okay guys, let's take a look underneath. We've got our front mount on for our dry sump lines. I trimmed the stud in the middle, chopped that thing now, it's hanging down to here. That was ugly. Trim that off, 8L clamps in place. The line runs to the back. And as you can see here, I've got my return line in. It's already wrapped with some silicone heat sleeve. Got my Wiggins clamp on it. This is the fitting that I need on here. I've got my hose marked. I'm gonna cut it. I'll take it up to my buddy Kyle. He's got a Brown & Miller crimp machine, and he'll crimp this end on here for me, and we'll be done with that. As you can see back here, here's our main suction, our feed line. This is our return. And once I get this one cut to length and it's routed underneath, then I can move both of these over, clamp them together, and they're out of the way of our suspension and the travel of the truck arm. Here's the wiring for our heater probe. It's wrapped up out of the way. Here's our main connections. I'm going to hook all this up, and I will make a harness for this to go to an electrical plug inside the car. On the inside of the car, there's our ground. I've got it tied up and out of the way. And then as you can see, our dry sump tank is in. Here's our return line, goes into our return filter down into the tank. This is where the breather is going to hook up. I have a lightweight Brown & Miller hose that uses a Wiggins clamp to clamp on here. I don't know if I'm going to run it straight out the back yet or out of the corner over here in the right rear, because I think I'm going to mount my breather tank. I've got a pretty long lightweight Brown & Miller hose. I may mount my breather tank over in that corner of the trunk on the right side. So what I think I'm going to do is I'm going to mount my breather tank for my dry sump system here. And I think I'll punch a hole probably right in here for my breather hose. This is the one that comes from Brown & Miller. This is, believe it or not, this is super lightweight. It weighs maybe a pound altogether. But this will thread onto the end of my breather element. We'll clamp it there. But I want to get the fuel cell in, route my fuel line, get everything going out towards the front of the car, and get my fire extinguisher discharge nozzle back in the trunk before I do that. This video has taken me about 3.5 days to shoot simply because of the rain and other projects that are going on. So that's it for this so far. Oh, one more thing. I did get all of my brake lines in the front. Check this out. I finally got all of the brake lines completed. I've got them going from my reservoir to the masters. All three going to my clutch master. Then down here, I've got my stabuli fitting on it. This will actually go into a cable tie or a clamp right here, and then that will run over to my clutch. But that's all of my lines for the brake system. I finally got all those in. I think that came out pretty clean. I'm pretty happy with the way that looks, the way it came out. Now I know it looks like this is pretty far underneath the cowl, but in reality, you can see inside of them and easily pour brake fluid into them. I mean, you can see both of them, and it's an easy straight shot into them. So it's not something that I'm worried about. On the old COT chassis, this part of the cowl wasn't here. And here's something else I wanted to show everybody. When I mentioned the greenhouse of the car in the last video, walking through, looking at all the scrap chassis, I was talking about the mounting points. Let me show you in the trunk. This composite greenhouse is all one piece. If you see the seam here, it runs all the way down the door top, around the front. This is all one piece. So the entire roof, C post, B post, A post, windshield base, and the rear window bezel, all of this is one piece. These are the parts that I was showing you. These are the stanchions with the nubs on them that I was telling you about that mount the greenhouse to the chassis. So the greenhouse mounts there, goes down to the chassis on both sides in the rear. And then if you look underneath the cowl in the front, you can see here's where the cowl mounts. So this tube, this stanchion, has a ball and a socket on it to adjust the height of the cowl. Once it's adjusted, you tighten that screw and it doesn't move. I hope that covers the questions everybody was asking about a greenhouse and what those tubes meant. Okay guys, that's a wrap on this video. We got a bunch done with the dry sump system on the Supra. I hope this video gives you a better idea of where all those components are located, how they work together, and what each piece does as far as holding the oil in the tank, the lines under the car, and how the pump pushes it through the engine, the oil cooler, the filter, and back to the tank. I hope you learned something. I hope this was informative. This video has taken a couple of days to shoot simply because of the weather. Our next video is going to be a track day prep video. It's going to be on the Tundra right back there. I'm going to pull it out. We're going to do a track day prep on it. When I stored it over the winter, I ventilated the fuel cell, pumped everything out of it, stuck my leaf blower in there with a piece of dryer hose, dried it completely out. Don't ever store your car for long term with hydrocarbon fuel in the fuel cell. It will eat the liner out of it and cause it to leak. Trust me, it will happen. We're going to get the Tundra ready for a track day. We're going to go through the prep. We're going to put oil in it. We're going to prime the system. We got a new filter to go in it. Check the fuel filter. Check the brakes. Look at the pads. Look at the rotors. I've also fabricated a new window bezel for it. This is the one that was in it. This is the one that I'm putting in it. I've made this one so I can hook a hose to it with my blower for my helmet. So we're going to go and put that in. We're going to wire the fan for that as well. And that's all coming up in the next video. I appreciate every one of you taking the time to comment and subscribe with the channel. I greatly appreciate it. It goes a long way. You watching this channel, letting me know what you want to see and how much you like it, means a lot to me personally. Thank you guys. I'll see you in the next video. Up next, we'll reinstall our plug for our temperature. Oh, fuck.